Good afternoon. I'm State Representative Seth Grove, co-chair of the Taxpayers Caucus, a bicameral caucus of the House and Senate created after the not-so-fun 2015-16 budget impasse to bring House and Senate members together to focus on how we make Pennsylvania more taxpayer-friendly state. This is, I believe, the fourth Taxpayer Caucus hearing we have held throughout the state to dive into the Senate tax plan that was sent to us a few months ago. A couple members here have been to different panels before, and this one is hosted by Representative Matt Dowling, who is a big champion of taxpayers in his district. We appreciate his support and the members being here, and I'm going to throw it over to Matt, who's going to his show.
Well, good afternoon. Just to note that today's informal hearing proceedings are being streamed online at repdowling.com and recorded by the House Republican video crew for rebroadcast on local cable networks. The audio from this hearing will be rebroadcast on WMBS Radio 590 AM and 101.1 FM tomorrow at 4:15 p.m. I want to thank those who have taken the time to come provide testimony for today's hearing. I also want to thank my fellow representatives for joining us here today. Finally, I want to thank my constituents who are here in person, joining us online or via a rebroadcast. As we all know, the state budget became law on July 11th after a 43-7 vote in the Senate and 173-27 vote in the House, and with no action from Governor Wolf, became law. However, parts of that budget, primarily the revenue-generating bills, were left unfinished. On July 27th, the Senate voted 26-24 in support of an amended version of House Bill 542 that was supported by the governor. This bill, known more commonly as the tax code, would include nearly $600 million in new taxes. Based on our population, that would amount to $180 in additional taxes for every family of four in Pennsylvania. I am proud to note and say, while we are House members testifying today, that my senator, Senator Pat Stefano of the 32nd Senatorial District, voted no on that piece of legislation. Many of the proposed taxes fell on the natural gas industry. A gross receipts tax on natural gas, an example, home and business heating bills, would be reinstated at a rate of 5.7%. You may notice that I said reinstated. That's correct. This is a zombie tax returning from the grave. It was eliminated in Pennsylvania in 2000. The Senate also suggested a severance tax on top of the existing natural gas impact fee, which already functions as a tax. Because of our geography, I chose to editorialize a little more on natural gas, but the Senate also wished to raise our taxes or add taxes to electricity, fireworks, online shopping, telephones, and telecommunications. These informal hearings have been set up to allow us to gather information regarding the Senate revenue plan. Input from testimony at hearings like these has been useful and, I believe, decisive in which direction the House should go. The PA House has also been carefully considering other options to generate the revenue necessary to pay for this year's overindulgent budget. With that said, I'm excited to return to Harrisburg on Monday to caucus a new revenue plan that the PA House Republicans recently announced. I know that in my discussions and decision-making, I'll be able to take comments from today's and previous hearings as we work to end this budget stalemate. With that, we are going to open up our testimony, and we'll do brief introductions. We'll do a self-introduction of our representatives that are here today, starting at the far end with Representative Warner.
Thank you, Representative Dowling. I'm Representative Ryan Warner, 52nd District, Fayette, and Westmoreland counties.
Thanks for having me down today, Matt. Jeff Pyle, 60th Legislative District, Armstrong, Butler, and Indiana counties.
Thank you, Matt. I'm Mike Reese. I represent the 59th Legislative District, which is portions of Westmoreland and Somerset County.
It's good to be here. Good to see everyone. I'm Rick Saccone. I represent Southern Allegheny County. I'm just right up the 51, Route 51, a few miles, and Elizabeth is where I live, and Northern Washington County. Thank you.
We will begin our testimony today. Anyone who has submitted written testimony, that has been scanned and will be uploaded to my website at repdowling.com, most likely tomorrow, when this video is also posted there. We will begin with testimony from Anna McCausland, Deputy State Director of Americans for Prosperity. After Anna has given her testimony, I will open it up for any questions from the representatives that they may have.
Excellent. Thank you for having me today. I have given some written comments. I wanted to just kind of expand upon these. My name is Anna McCausland. I'm the Deputy State Director with Americans for Prosperity. We're a nationwide grassroots organization. In Pennsylvania, we have nearly 200,000 everyday citizens, activists who communicate with you all on a daily basis. Our purpose is to recruit, educate, and mobilize citizens across the Commonwealth in support of the policies of a free society at the local, state, and federal levels. So our goal is, in doing all of that, giving Pennsylvanians the ability and the tools to live their life as they see fit, especially the least fortunate. So I've been in Harrisburg about 12 years, and I'm surprised that that's actually longer than a lot of legislators. But I've been watching the budget process, and I think it's changed a little bit in the past couple years. There have always been lobbyists looking for handouts. So when I say that I'm a lobbyist, please hold all of the rotten tomatoes in the back of the room. There's always a special interest, and you have a special interest. There's someone in Harrisburg lobbying legislators to take away your special interests in support of their special interests. But what I found astonishing, starting in probably 2015-16 budget, was that it looked like the purpose was to find a niche business or taxpayer group that somehow hasn't been taxed and tax them to fund the budget. So if everyone here doesn't know, there's a budget book for those of you listening, and now it's considered a tax exemption or a loophole if you don't pay taxes on everything. Your daycare that isn't taxed, that's called a tax exemption when the budget office is preparing tax documents. And it's most often when the sales and use tax is not applied on some kind of good or service. And in 2015, it seemed like, either appropriations staff or other legislators, people really involved in finishing the budget, they were looking at a menu of items, and this menu was leaked. And that menu provided different options and how much it was going to fund the budget. And this thinking seemed to be, if we levy a tax on some kind of particular group, then how much money can we get to fund the budget? Thankfully, there were no tax increases in the 2015-16 budget. But in 2016-17, talk about zombie taxes, the zombie bill from 2015-16 that was killed actually was revived to become the final code bill that was passed in that budget. In that time, various sales tax were enacted on new and innovative businesses such as the vaping industry. So that 40% tax on all of their current inventory, now a year later, has put 100 businesses out of business. So the $13 million that line item filled on the 2016-17 budget is no longer an option, because that one tax caused 100 small businesses to go out of business. And the ripple effect of that is, of course, people are losing their jobs, and communities are having to make up for that vacuum. The impact of a tax increase on this budget would also be similar. So we believe that people know how best to use their own money, not the government. So we can't think of the Senate tax increase plan in a vacuum. Local taxes, state taxes, federal taxes, they're all choking the ability of the average Pennsylvanian or business owner to succeed. Recently, the Bureau of Labor Statistics data shows the average American family pays more in taxes than on clothing and food combined. and it's about $10,000 of their tax burden, local, state, federal, and they only spend about $9,000 on food and clothing for a year. And that's pretty astonishing. Pennsylvania has the 5th highest unemployment rate in the nation. The legislature should be using this opportunity to fix and grow our economy and not take out loans or further penalize those small firms that make up 98.2% of the state's employers. According to information provided by Rep. Dowling, the Senate plan will cost the average Pennsylvanian $178.81 for a family of 4. Doesn't sound like a lot, maybe, but keep in mind the sad part is virtually everyone who works in Harrisburg can pay that $178, probably myself included. But there's many people throughout the Commonwealth and in your rural districts that are poor, struggling, still trying to come back from the economic downturn. I know in the last week, my 4-year-old wants to play soccer. Okay, that's $95. And my daughter's school pictures that she's going to have taken next week, that's probably another $45 because I get suckered into the most highest package for all the pictures. And then with her school supplies, add up just those 3 expenditures, I've already blown $178. But I've used that to, part of my kids' soccer tuition goes to a foundation to then help poor kids in need. So I've made that choice to spend that money. And I've made the choice to be saddled with the pictures of my daughter forever in my house. And I've also chosen to spur the economy and buy the necessary school supplies. But what I can't choose is whether the Senate's plan is passed by the House. Thankfully, on Tuesday, of course, Representative Grove and others were there for the taxpayer budget press conference. That's a solution that does not raise taxes. It doesn't, there's some small tax increases, changing of the sales tax, but it does not raise the taxes on all Pennsylvanians like the Senate plan does. It's not going to be putting essentially a sales tax on your utility bill. It's not going to be impacting the severance national gas or the natural gas industry, the severance tax would. So we advocate on a daily basis that we should move forward. And the question that we have to ask ourselves as Pennsylvanians, as constituents, is whether it's acceptable to bail out Harrisburg's tax and spend machine, including that $1.3 billion of borrowing, or should we expect more from the taxpayers, from the tax dollars that are already spent? And I think the House GOP caucus has made that decision. We want to look at the tax dollars that have already been paid into the Commonwealth that haven't been used in the past 3 years. We want to use that money instead of going into debt. In the last year alone, we've lost 41,000 Pennsylvania residents. 8,000 of those were young people. I like to think of myself as a young person. And with that they're moving to other states that have far better economic growth. So in 10 years, if we continue that pace, we'll be almost 1 million workers down. Earlier this year, we had identified about $3 billion worth of excess spending and innovative ideas like liquor privatization. And I know the House has already passed 5 or 6 of those bills, and it's no longer in your court. But that's one way to add $200 million into the budget. This might not be popular, but the entertainment tax credit is $65 million, and that's a 14-cent return, according to the Independent Fiscal Office. So the money that's being spent in corporate welfare to the tune of $800 million, that's not reaping the benefit that we think it is. There are other options to make the Commonwealth more prosperous. A tax increase is not one of them. There's been a lot of talk, especially on Twitter, about how the taxpayers' budget is going to hurt the Commonwealth credit rating. I can't imagine that a $1.3 billion borrowing scheme is going to do any good things to our credit rating. So I wanted to throw that out there. The problem that isn't whether moving around money is good or bad, and I know that discussion has also been held on Twitter. The problem is that we aren't growing our economy. In the last few budget cycles, it has been, how do we end this and kind of move on to other things. But we all know that it's gonna come up again. June 30th is like, the big red circle on the calendar. So we shouldn't be continuing to be in this kind of relentless cycle of scurrying to find things to fix the budget for the next year. We should be looking at ways at growing the economy. And Pennsylvania is at a critical juncture. But I am excited to work with all of the members of the Taxpayer Caucus and any other person in the House or Senate who's willing to partner with us to pass these big ideas going forward. We need big thinkers and we need big doers, and that's how we're going to change the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for the better. So I will stop and be happy to answer questions.
We'll start with questions from Representative Pyle. Jeff?
Hi, Anna, good
Hi,
to see you again.
good to see you.
I couldn't agree more with you on the severance tax. I'm gonna get it right out there for anybody that'll listen. I will not be voting for the Senate's tax code plan. I feel there's a lot of inadequacies in there that do not allow us to meet our constitutional obligation of nailing a revenue collection. Being on appropriations and energy gives me a pretty good view of this.
Yeah.
Okay, they're estimating 5 trillion MCF's gonna pass through the pipelines that will generate 110 million, not next year, but the following year. Okay? That sounds all good for people that don't live in the shale. I do. Now, it's always of great irony to find out that the city of Philadelphia, with its booming Marcellus shale industry, is collecting more from local impact fees than the 122 deep wells of Armstrong. 10 years ago, when we first started discovering and exploring the Marcellus, the common complaint was, it's all Texans, it's all Oklahomans, it's all Wyomingans. That's because 10 years ago, the Pennsylvania-based companies were not yet capitalized nor possessed the technology to go sideways, which is where the real money is. Now they are. My guys are going deep and sideways, and those are all Pennsylvanians working there. When we talk about a severance tax, we're talking about hundreds, I'm not exaggerating, literally hundreds of my people being sent home on the promise that DEP is going to be much more conducive with their permit process. Here's a big eye-opener. Everything that's included in the Senate's tax code plan that would improve the permit structure for gas drillers is already the law. It's like we're giving them a one-year pass for what they promised to do last year. I feel the severance tax in and of itself is enough to vote against this. Other Senate proposals within this, 6.5% on every utility for everybody every month, big no. The borrowing is reprehensible. Now, and I'll wrap it up, Matt. When we in Approps walked into this, and I'll double check this with Representative Grove, he's on that committee with me, we were told there was a $1.5 billion deficit carried over from last year that we had to make up before we could proceed into this budget. And lo and behold, Representative Grove, Representative Mal, and a bunch of other representatives came up with, what was the number, 1.8, 1.6 that you guys pulled out of that? 2.4. 2.4 is still bigger than 1.5. Just, so we don't have a deficit. So I dug into what Seth was cooking out there, and I said, I gotta see your formula. How'd you figure this out? He said, we took the amount, we budgeted them last year, subtracted from that all their expenditures to run their business for a year, also subtracted from that the amount of commitments they had made going forward, and that the remainder was that number that they calculated up to 2.4 billion. Now, I'm gonna stop this diatribe, Anna, in just 1 second. You talked about your daughter playing soccer. I got 2 daughters at Penn State. I had to call my mom to borrow an egg last week, okay? One lives in State College with higher costs for housing. One commutes to New Kensington. drives every day. We got our little beater car. In my budget, if I budget $1,000 for each girl's tuition, and the ones comes in a little lower than 1,000, that's a little bit money I have more to work with. But what happens if one comes in low and one comes in high? Should I just look at each of them and say, sorry, the hard number's 1,000 and I'm gonna have money left over on you and I don't have enough for you? No, you're gonna shift money from the one that is fat into the one that needs it. And that's how I see the work of Grove and Mal and Kiefer and all those guys, Matt, all those guys that worked on this. All we are asking the state to do is be responsible and manage their money like we ask everybody else to. I totally agree with you. There is no reason to raise taxes.
Right. Thank you. I
Thank
couldn't
you.
put it better. I mean, and it's not just the severance tax and the.
Virtual transfer tax.
There's
could you
the
really-
fireworks tax. So we're gonna allow
Actually,
individuals to buy fireworks, but now we're
they
gonna
weren't
charge
gonna tax
12%. So it's
I'm okay
just
with half of that.
the-
Buying fireworks.
Interesting, because the sales tax is 6%.
No, I want to buy fireworks. No, could I ask one question and then I'll quit hogging up the mic? Could you explain this virtual transaction tax? Because this thing is like oh, you got it, okay.
Oh, I don't want to take their fire, no. I'll
No,
hold
it's
that.
cool. I'm really cloudy on this. I need a better explanation. Thank you, Chairman Dowling.
Thank you, Representative Pyle. We will be getting to that virtual tax here later on in the hearing. That's something we haven't had the opportunity really to caucus or discuss a whole lot, so I'm excited to get to that today. Representative Saccone, you had comment or question?
Thank you, Matt. Yes, I'm hoping that you'll comment a little bit about our spending, because obviously I will never vote for the Senate's spend-free tax code bill, and I didn't vote for the spend number bill that we have right now. But it's forcing us to look for creative ways, as you said, to find new taxes to satisfy that and satiate our spending addiction that we have in this state. And so even if we balance this budget this year with this plan that I'm hoping to vote on next week, we're going to have this problem over and over again until we fix our spending problem.
Yeah.
So you didn't really mention that
Yeah,
much. Do you want to talk about that?
It's that cycle that we've gotten ourselves into, that, as Seth Grove has said multiple times, we don't have the deficit is just the amount of money that comes in, and we want to spend more than that. And now that's what we're calling a deficit. It's not that we want to spend too much money. And the House and Senate passed a spending plan before a funding plan. So even though the spending plan was only, I think, 0.1% of an increase over the previous year's budget, and the spending is out of control, but if there were innovative ways to make up for that, $1 billion maybe in prevailing wage, liquor privatization. I mean, there's ways to make up the spending. I find the criticism of the House plan kind of crazy, in fact, that, people saying that they're not going to have the votes for this plan. Well, but the tax increase plan didn't have the votes in the House, and the Senate didn't have the votes for VGTs, and the Senate didn't have the votes for liquor privatization, which actually hardly made it out of committee. So this spending is out of control, and we've got ways that we can make up for that. But the first response, knee-jerk reaction, should not be, let's increase taxes, because I can't, I have a fixed income. I can't just go out and say, okay, well, to my employer, I need more money because my living expenses now exceeded my income, so you need to give me more. That's not how the real world works. And it's upsetting for those individuals who aren't making the $85,000 that legislators make, or hundreds of thousands of dollars that some lobbyists make. They're scraping by, and we need to look at those people in the face whenever we think about passing a tax increase like that and continuing that march toward more and more spending.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Grove.
Thank you, Anna. Punitive taxes on an industry. We have an example last year of the vape
The
shops
vape taxes.
who, government came in and said, yeah, 40% wholesale tax sounds about right. Let's plug that in, and phew, businesses just went away. Other punitive taxes, severance tax, punitive tax, gross receipts tax, natural gas punitive tax, which is interesting because depending on where you live and who your energy supplier is, you may get hit with those gross receipts taxes or not. Like my neighborhood where I live is for the electric utility. I have a utility company. The other half of my neighborhood has a co-op. So I get hit with the tax. The other half don't get hit with the tax. So we have all these punitive taxes coming about. Now, looking back at that last tax, what do you think a severance tax is going to do to the west and to the north, particularly in more economically depressed areas? I mean, you're talking huge. I mean, we're not talking like the minimum wage. You're talking family-sustaining jobs.
Yes.
Do you feel a severance tax, a punitive tax of anywhere between $80 million and $500 million on one industry is going to benefit the economy of this Commonwealth and ensure we have family-sustaining jobs, tax revenue coming in, and a strong economy?
Well, I'd be hard-pressed not to find a tax that isn't punitive. So the fact that you tax my income and that my locality taxes my income, I find that pretty punitive as well. Maybe I'm a radical. I probably am. But it's not just that we don't have a severance tax. There's the impact fee. And the good thing about Governor Corbett is that he did cut $4 billion out of his first budget, which is a lot more than our current deficit or overspending. He also enacted an impact fee, which should just be called basically a severance tax, because no other state in the union has an impact fee. It's just Pennsylvania. It's just that we like to be special and call our taxes fees. Kind of the same thing. But the ancillary businesses that will be affected by a severance tax. So you can cap the wells, no more gas is coming out, send the men home and women, completely hurt that industry. But if you lose a job, you're not going traveling. So you're also not going to be visiting hotels. You're not going to be going out to dinner as much because you simply can't afford to, not having a job. So then all of the businesses that sprung up in these communities, revitalize the communities, all of them go away. And those jobs go away. So it's a specialized industry. Universities and community colleges, as Representative Pyle was saying, and 10 years ago we weren't prepared for it. But now the community colleges, the VOTECs, they're all training men and women for good family-sustaining jobs in an industry that's benefiting far and wide beyond the borders of the Commonwealth. And the problem is the gas prices are down. This industry has been very honest about how they're regulated and the taxes they pay. They're regulated far more than many businesses because of the ecological impact. But they are also very honest, I think, on what's going to happen to the industry. It goes away. They go to other states where there's other shale plays because corporations make money to employ people to produce the product that they do. They don't have to stay in Pennsylvania. And I think you look at the vape industry as a smaller scale, but the $13 million that they were supposed to pay into the budget was supposed to be ongoing because for some reason we use static modeling when we look at how the taxes are going to impact the economy. 100 businesses folded up shop. So you're not going to have $13 million to put into the budget anymore. It's going to be applied through all the other industries that we decide to tax.
Thank you. I want to thank you for your testimony today, Anna. One follow-up that I do have, and more a comment than a question, has to do with the severance tax, and I thank you for bringing that to our attention and discussion here today. One of the things that I have realized recently, and there's no secret in the fact that if there's a severance tax attached to something, I will definitely be a no vote because of the region that I live in. I've learned more and more that the severance tax is not an issue that falls along party lines, but more so along geographic lines.
Yeah.
And more I see that my brethren on the eastern side of the state are looking for a piece of an industry that is taking place and impacting us on the western side of the state. And I just can't ethically allow the eastern part of Pennsylvania to pickpocket my constituents here in the west. So I thank you for your testimony.
So that's 2 no votes, so I'm going to put that in my scorecard.
You can put that there. Yeah, absolutely. Elizabeth, we're going to move on to you,
Yes.
to your testimony today. Elizabeth Stile is the Director of Policy with the Commonwealth Foundation. Elizabeth?
Well, thank you for having me here to testify today. I think it's fantastic that we have a Taxpayer Caucus that's looking for alternatives to the tax and spend nature that has characterized a lot of our budgets in the recent past. I work for the Commonwealth Foundation. I'm the Director of Policy Analysis, but I am based out here in Western Pennsylvania, so it's nice to not have to make the drive to Harrisburg. And I wanted to start my testimony today by recounting a few quotes from a story I read about Fayette City, so right here in this region, that I think is emblematic of the struggles that a lot of rural Pennsylvania is dealing with right now. This piece was written by Tim Carney at the Washington Examiner right before the presidential election in November. He writes about a man called Mr. Duda and his son Junior. Quote, Mr. Duda was a steelworker. He worked for 40 years at the mill, his son brags. Now almost no jobs are left. If you just drive down the river roads from here through Monessen, Junior says, it's all shut down, end quote. That's the economic reality in Pennsylvania. An economy that's stuck. We're in stagnation. Some would even say decline. Anna talked about the migration numbers. Another way to put that is 36 college-educated students or college-educated graduates leaving Pennsylvania every single day. Unemployment levels that are historically or uncharacteristically high, I should say. Pennsylvania usually has about the national average in terms of unemployment. We've been well above the national average for over a year now, and we're still trending in the wrong direction. Fayette County, where we are today, unemployment rate is 6.9%, the second highest in the entire Commonwealth. So I talk about those economic indicators because I think it's important to ask yourselves, what are the effects of the overspending? What are the effects of the tax hikes? And this is what you get. We talked about the state government basically just trying to find a way to survive from year to year on the higher spending instead of thriving. And that's exactly what they've done to Pennsylvanians. We're no longer in a position to thrive, we're just trying to survive. And it doesn't have to be that way. And I want to push back a little bit on all the rhetoric about cut to the bone, there's no place left for us to get money. The only responsible thing to do is to raise taxes or borrow the money. And for context, I think it's important for people to understand that the general fund, just the general fund alone, which is only a small part of the overall spending in the Commonwealth, has grown by almost $3 billion in 3 years. That's more than the prior 8 years combined. So not only are we spending more and more every year, we're accelerating the growth of that spending, which is very dangerous. And again, raised taxes last year, and here we're having the same conversation. And I don't understand how, if a $650 million tax hike didn't balance the budget last year, how a almost $600 million tax hike is going to work this year. To me, that just doesn't make sense. And so we've talked a lot about what this means for families. We've heard the $180 per family of 4 figure. We did an analysis with the Beacon Hill Institute using dynamic modeling that estimates the loss of about 3,600 jobs in just year 1, and then you add on to that as you go down. And these are jobs that may disappear, or they're jobs that may never be created. So it's important to look at both the seen and the unseen effects here of this tax plan. And I do want to spend just a moment on the severance tax. No, we're not an energy company, but I think it's important to point out that even the Independent Fiscal Office has noted that most of the burden of this tax will be borne by ratepayers, by natural gas users, not by the companies. They'll simply pass it on. 93% will be borne by consumers, both in Pennsylvania and non-residents that purchase Pennsylvania gas. And another myth that is so prevalent that I don't think people understand is that the severance tax, or the natural gas industry is somehow stuck, that they can't go anywhere. Pennsylvania is the only place where they can get the gas, and the gas isn't going anywhere. And that's simply a misunderstanding of how this industry works, because when you look at the rig count in Ohio, the rig count has doubled in the past year. In Pennsylvania, not even close. Most other drilling states, the rig counts are near double what they were a year ago. So it's coming back. Drilling is coming back in other regions, but it's not coming back at that same rate in Pennsylvania, and that's very concerning. Another example of how the tax uncertainty is stunting job growth, Range Resources, which for a long time was putting the vast majority of their investment in Pennsylvania Marcellus, last year bought a drilling company in Louisiana. So what does that tell you? That tells you they're changing their strategy because of the tax uncertainty. And while right now it may just be slow growth, if you implement another tax, it's going to be actual layoffs, as Representative Pyle said. And when you compare the severance tax in Pennsylvania to the severance tax in Ohio, just across the border, Pennsylvania's is roughly about 1.4%. When you look at the impact fee and transfer it over, Ohio's is 1.3%. So if I'm a business and I'm looking at 1.3 versus 1.4, and I have all the tax uncertainty of Pennsylvania plus all the issues with permitting, where do you think I'm going to invest? So just a few comments on the severance tax. I think it's important to keep making those points, especially to our friends across the state. So enough with the doom and gloom. How do we fix this mess? How do we move on? What are the viable solutions for balancing the budget without raising taxes? We've talked a little bit already about the shadow budget that the Taxpayer Caucus has done some homework on, and the proposal to shift the one-time shifts, $1.2 billion in transfers from 41 different funds. These are tax dollars that have already been collected that we're simply moving to pay for last year's bills. And I don't think we can emphasize that enough, that these are one-time shifts for a one-time problem. We're never going to have a $1.5 billion gap from the fiscal year 16-17 again. This is a one-time problem. But we also recognize that if we don't change the trajectory in Pennsylvania, we're going to have these reoccurring gaps every single year. So it's a two-part solution. How do we fix last year's mistakes? And then how do we change government so that we don't have the same situation year after year? And to that effect, we've talked about liquor store privatization, like Anna mentioned. We've also talked about welfare reforms. Welfare is our biggest driver of spending in Pennsylvania. So if you want to get your biggest bang for your buck in terms of reform, you need to look at welfare. We've talked about driving down the cost of welfare by implementing co-pays on Medicaid for families with means. I know that's something that already passed in the House, as well as helping people transition to self-sufficiency using work requirements. It's a very powerful tool. Again, I know there's a lot of support for these things in the House, but I think it's important to reiterate that if we're ever going to get our spending under control, welfare reform has to be a part of the package. And then also point out that the taxpayers' budget proposal does have some recurring revenue sources. It does call out corporate welfare for cuts, and I think while it's not a perfect plan, it is a huge step in the right direction. And I'm very excited to see rank and file lawmakers taking it upon themselves to articulate what they stand for instead of just constantly talking about what we stand against. So to wrap it all up, in the end, we have to address Harrisburg spending addiction if we're going to generate jobs, if we're going to change the economy for Fayette City, for Fayette County, for all Pennsylvanians. And the reason we're behind is not because we're not taxed enough or we don't spend enough. The reason Pennsylvania is falling behind is because we've forgotten that the greatest antidote to economic stagnation, the greatest solution to our poverty problem is economic freedom. So thank you for your time today, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I know we once again touched for a rather long period on the severance tax itself, and I just wanted to ask a follow-up, or maybe that you could expand a little bit about the information that the Independent Fiscal Office has released, because I know I've had phone calls and emails that people have said the severance tax is not going to hurt us as a consumer. It's only going to affect the players within the industry. I'd also mention that both Williams and Chevron wanted to be here today, but had scheduling conflicts and were unable to add testimony. So with that, we're kind of leaning on you for a little bit of that inside information.
Yeah, so they did this analysis. They do this every year. They look at the governor's revenue proposals and they analyze them and say, how much revenue can we actually generate from these proposals? So these are numbers based on the governor's proposed severance tax, that 93% would fall to consumers. And people who are proponents of this tax may say, well, a lot of these people are going to be non-Pennsylvanians, so who cares? But some of them are going to be Pennsylvanians. And the cost of the tax is really just one element. You also have to factor in just the overall environment that these operators are looking at. And when a state government is year after year talking about how to tax an industry, that doesn't give an indication that you're open for business. That tells them we better look somewhere else. We better move shop. And so the severance tax matters not just for Southwest PA, not just for Northeast PA. It matters for all Pennsylvanians because we all benefit from the economic boom that this industry has generated. And I can't justify or emphasize enough that these are well-paying jobs. We've already talked about that, but well-paying jobs. Jobs that are, frankly, in many struggling communities. This is, the one bright spot, and it's incredibly incumbent upon us to do whatever we can to spur the parts of Pennsylvania's economy that do have opportunity for growth right now. And I will say that maybe someday they'll come back to Pennsylvania and exploit the Marcellus if we go ahead and tax it now. But who knows when that's going to be. And there are plenty of other basins in Texas, in Louisiana, in Wyoming, all over the United States, and more being explored all the time, where they can send those rigs and that investment and those workers. They are not dependent upon Pennsylvania.
Thank you. I do just want to take one moment to welcome Representative Bud Cook of the 49th Legislative District. I know Representative Cook had another engagement and wasn't sure if he'd make it here today, but we thank him for taking the time to join us this afternoon. With that, Representative Pyle, I believe you had a question for Elizabeth.
Hi, Elizabeth. I love your emails, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I wasn't raised in government. I was a high school teacher, okay? So my understanding of these higher mathematical equations may be a little fuzzy on the edges, but $1.5 billion deficit entering this fiscal year. Sets guys go out and find $2.2 billion laying in accounts dormant. How do we have a deficit?
Well, it's interesting to see the reaction to this plan because I think it shows you that a lot of people who are supposedly experts don't really understand how the state budget works.
Well, I won't claim expertise. I just have a layman's understanding of addition, subtraction, and I never pressed that button on the calculator that said SIN because Grandma told me to avoid sin. I wish we could go back to April when our Appropriations Committee rolled out our first spending proposal, which, if you will note, in House Bill 416 was $31.46 billion. As fate would have it, that almost nailed it. I mean, we almost pegged that within, I don't know, I'm thinking 10, 20 bucks. But when it comes back from the Senate, that number became 31.99. Now, we've established we did not have a rollover deficit. We just had a whole bunch of money laying dormant and stagnant in these accounts that nobody wanted to talk about. I really hope you have this presentation for the Senate Because the way I'm seeing it, we had a balanced budget. We could have signed on the 30th of June, and they wanted to lump another $500 million in spending in there, which I'm aware Representative Grove has made a helpful identification list for who gets what. I'll let him share that with you. Just a couple of other clarifications. We calculated local impact fee at around 4.5 to 4.6% ballpark. Now, what that doesn't reflect, last year, Armstrong County, with no taxpayer money expended, got 96 miles of new roads. Okay? No township money, no county money, no state money. Drillers built new roads. We're not going to get that this year. And for the record, yes, I have voted to sell the liquor stores 5 or 6 times. And if you talk to Seth, a friend of ours who's also a rep up in Williamsport, we counted. We have voted for it 16 times.
Wow.
Both appropriations and on the floor, just clear in the air. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Warner.
Thank you, Matt. Elizabeth, thank you very much for your testimony today. You had mentioned earlier about the severance tax rate in Ohio comparable to Pennsylvania. Can you go over those numbers again real quick?
Yes, so when you look at, again, the Independent Fiscal Office, they have a formula that they use to take our impact fee and put it in terms of a severance tax. What is the effective, they use 2 different types of calculations. I looked at the effective lifetime rate. And when you make the calculations on Pennsylvania's impact fee, it comes out right now to about 1.4%. And Ohio's is 1.3 for reference. Most states are somewhere between 1 and 5, but there are a lot of exemptions that drillers are allowed to claim. In Pennsylvania, we have no exemptions. So the effective rate in some comparisons could actually be
So basically,
higher.
in our neighboring state of Ohio, we already have effectively have a higher tax rate than Ohio.
According to their most recent calculations, those numbers may be, older. They're updated yearly.
And many of these companies, it's fair to say that they also pay corporate tax, business taxes.
Yes, I'm not intimately familiar with the corporate tax structure in Ohio, but yes, this is levied on top of all of your standard business taxes.
Yeah. The reason I ask these questions is because it's been a point from the current administration to portray that natural gas drillers don't pay their fair share. And I'm just trying to make a point that currently right now that they're already paying a higher effective tax rate than Ohio on top of business taxes. And not that there's any particular favor to one business or the other, but we look at the natural gas industry and have to think, well, why are we adding extra tax to natural gas? There's no severance tax on logging or coal or anything else, right? You have what about cabinet making, for example? Be nice to have
Natural
a severance
resources, yeah.
right? Well, why don't we look at the Southeast? I mean, pharmaceuticals are a huge industry there. How come we've never heard about a effective severance tax per pill, maybe on opiate-based painkillers?
And one other thing I'd point out about the Southeast is they have the Marcus Hook refinery, and that does benefit a lot from development of the Marcellus Shale. So even if folks think that they're not affected, that's an economic generator that would be significantly affected.
I just want to, again, clarify the point that there's a lot of people from the Southeast that favor a severance tax that takes away from what we have here in the Southwest, and we've gone over some statistics earlier about Fayette County. And it's one thing that we have going for us and can continue to grow in that industry. And, one of my colleagues, he always says, once you take it, you have the impact tax where the money is supposed to stay local. You have the severance tax, which will then go to the general fund, will go to Harrisburg. And, we always like to say, once that money crosses the Susquehanna River, you ain't never seen it again, right?
Well, yeah, and
Or we have to
again,
go fight for it. So right now, we have it
Absolutely.
here in an impact fee, right? And that's what I'm going to continue to fight for. And that's why I put down, I don't know where Anna went, but you could put down another mark against being against the severance tax. So.
Absolutely, and I would just emphasize enough that the tax before lawmakers, lawmakers in the West, lawmakers in Central PA, lawmakers in the Southeast is the same. Raising taxes or shifting reserves that some people didn't even know existed, to pay money that we've already spent. And to me, that's a no-brainer. Why are we talking about potentially laying off people in already economically depressed areas to balance our books for just 1 year when we know we'll end up in the exact same spot again
Well,
next
again,
year.
when you mention the tax increases, you're effectively, and we've seen in the numbers previous year, you're effectively going to lose tax revenue by the higher. You're going to get to a point, and I believe that
Yes.
Pennsylvania is already there, that your higher taxes in the long run are going to lose you tax revenue because businesses and people are going to move out, and then therefore you do not get their tax revenue anymore.
Yep, we're already
So I
seeing
think
that.
we're at the point in Pennsylvania where we need to see a tax decrease.
Thank you. Representative Saccone.
Just quickly, I want to make, this may not be the right place to make this comment or question to you if you want to comment on it, but the proposal that we're going to be looking at next week, taking these lapsed funds, since you brought it up, even while I'm sitting here, I'm getting emails from special interest groups that are saying, these aren't lapsed funds, these are funds that are for allocated projects and so forth. The misinformation that is out there about what we're doing is unbelievable. And I don't know when we're going to clear that up, but, you know, maybe not this meeting unless you want to talk a little bit about it. But I'm getting emails from lots of different special interest groups that are just flat out wrong. And one of the criteria for picking which funds and how much funds we would take it was that it wasn't committed already. But again, that doesn't matter to special interests because they're just going to use whatever twist and turn they can to make their point, whether it's true or not, or whether it's factual or not. So
Yes.
Commonwealth can help with that by helping to clear the air and put out the actual factual information.
Yes, I make one comment on that. We've asked repeatedly DCNR. We've asked lots of different groups that are claiming that a lot of the reserve funds that have been suggested for one-time shifts are already claimed. We've been asking for a list. You know, show us the project list. Let us see the numbers. You know, let's work this out. And we have yet to receive those lists. So it seems that there are different people singing different tunes, and it's unclear what's actually factual. The only facts we have are that the numbers in the reserve funds are growing year after year, and for some of the funds that we've already researched a little more in depth, such as the Public Trust Transportation Fund, they haven't entered into those reserves in over 3 years. So what does that tell you? That tells you that operations are not going to change if you shift some of those reserves to balance last year's books.
Thank you. Representative Grove.
Just to follow up on that, the Treasurer's Office has created this transportation portal. If you haven't taken a look at it, take a look at it, because it is revolutionary on looking at expenditures, money in and money out. And that's really where this plan first started from, because we could actually take a look at the historical context of money coming in, money coming out. The one that Elizabeth just brought up, the Public Transportation Trust Fund. Now, the Treasurer's Office has the ability to take what we call the checking account. If that checking account has too much money in it, it is overfunded, he can then shift money over, and that's based on commitments, revenue in, expenditures, the account, all that for the financial analysis. If it's overfunded, he can create a savings account and shift all that money over to the savings account at the end of the year if they feel they don't need that money. The Public Transportation Trust Fund in itself, one account, in its savings account, not the expenditures, not the operating fund, not the checking accounts. Think of it as your checking account, your checking account. This would be the savings account, and I wish we all would have this in our account, but they're sitting on $268.2 million as of August 28th, 2017. That money has been sitting there for 3 years and growing. So when our mass transit companies and our local agencies don't know this because they only see the money coming into them, they don't know what Harrisburg is actually sitting on in all these reserve funds. So they're thinking, oh, it's our operational funds. So if you pull $357 million out of our operational funds, we can't operate. We're going to have, I think SEPTA said a 20% service reduction and
Layoffs.
Layoffs, 40% fare increases. Well, SEPTA doesn't see the money sitting in Harrisburg. And thanks to the Treasurer's Office, we as legislators finally get a look at all this money sitting in these accounts moving forward. That account in its, let me pull up, its checking account on July 8th, 2014 had $85.5 million in it. As of September 1st, 2017, its checking account had $293 million in it. And it's never really dipped below about $100 million over 3 years. So there is capacity within these funds to remove these dollars for one-time use, and they will continue to grow. Now, I have a question about kind of the shadow budget
Yep.
and the cash flow situation. So
Yes.
we hear the treasurer out there, the auditor general banging that we have to take out these short-term loans to fill that kind of lull as revenues are coming in with the budget. And we have that shadow budget sitting out there, which is restricted accounts, but it has restricted tax revenue
Uses,
coming into it too. Would it be a fair assessment to say by pulling all those dollars out of the general fund into these restricted funds, we've actually over time created the cash flow situation in the general fund because it's not sitting in the general fund? And an easy solution would be putting the money back in and reappropriating it so we have a better idea of the expenditures of the Commonwealth moving forward.
Yeah, one proposal that is a small portion of what was presented this week, but it's something like to see more of, is shifting those reserves more regularly, or even entire special funds back into the general fund, so it can go through the transparent appropriations process. Like you said, we coined the term shadow budget because it's not just residents, regular taxpayers that don't know about these accounts. It's legislators, it's special interests, it's people that are intimately familiar with state government that don't understand or know these accounts are as large as they are, don't understand how they're being spent, don't understand the choices that are being made, bottom line, don't understand why their taxes are going up. And so if we can shift more of those special accounts back to the general fund to get a little more transparency and some very important decision making, we're all for that.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you for your testimony today. Representative Grove had referenced the Treasurer's Transparency Portal. You can find that at patreasury.gov, and that's a great tool as we continue to move forward and we talk about other ways to fund our budget. I know when we return next Monday as the House, we're going to be caucusing and discussing at length some of these items. I know as legislators, we've been using that portal a great deal, but I would encourage my constituents to log on and to visit patreasury.gov and get familiar with that transparency portal. Elizabeth, thank you very much for your testimony. Next, we will be having testimony from Muriel Nuttall and Bob Shark. If you'd make your way to the dais now, we would appreciate that. For those of you who are joining us via the audio-only stream on WMBS Radio 590 AM and 101.1 FM, you're listening to the Pennsylvania Taxpayers Caucus, held by the House of Representatives. We're going to start our testimony with Muriel Nuttall, the Executive Director of the Fayette Chamber of Commerce. Then we'll move right into Mr. Shark's testimony. He is the Fayette Penn Economic Development Council Executive Director. And then we will take questions for either Muriel or Bob, kind of as a panel or as a group. So Muriel, with that.
Thank you. I would like to thank all of you for coming here today to listen to all of this testimony. I am kind of bringing it now to a more local point. I come here representing the Fayette County Chamber of Commerce. So we are an organization of about 600 business members and individuals. We represent about 17,500 employees in Fayette County and in the region. Now, the Fayette Chamber of Commerce has been around for a long time. We have a long history here, actually, founded in 1925. We've grown over the years as our business community has grown and changed. We actually started out as a very local, city chamber and have grown into a county chamber of commerce. It was very important that we came here today to talk to you about this tax increase in particular. The Fayette Chamber of Commerce has one mission. Our mission statement's long, lots of words, but in the end, helping our businesses succeed is what we do. When this information about this tax impending or proposed tax increase came out, I immediately jumped on it and talked to our partners over at the Pennsylvania Chamber of Commerce about the impact on the business community across the state. And that's what I bring to you today. Through our partners, we know that there is a manufacturer right here in Western Pennsylvania who looked at this tax increase that I'll break down a little further and figured that that would increase their operating costs by $3 million a year. That will not stay at that manufacturer, obviously, with the ripple down effect that's going to end up in all of our pockets. The Fayette Chamber of Commerce does stand very proud with the PA Chamber of Commerce. And Jean Barr pointed out at the PA Chamber level that they're disappointed as a chamber organization that the Senate voted in favor of the $600 million tax increase. That will definitely hurt Pennsylvania's job creators at a time when we are already struggling. It just will be very bad for business. Particularly, I want to talk about the natural gas taxes. Fayette County, every year in around November, I send out a survey to my membership. So, what kind of a year have you had? Has it been a good year? Has it been a bad year? Where are you struggling? Where do you need our help? How can we focus our energies? And the past years have been flat. Now, if you know me very well, and a couple of you do, you'll know that I am this eternal optimist. So it's very hard for me to, come in here and say, look, things aren't as great as they could be, because I'm always the one that's the cheerleader out there saying our businesses can do better. We have room for growth, and we do. Natural gas was huge here. When those people came here, when they started drilling their wells, we saw hope that we hadn't had in a long, long time. Our business community responded, our residential communities responded, and now to think that that package, that tax package, attacks that industry. Jean Barr, he pointed out an amazing set of information here, that should this proposal be enacted, natural gas will be taxed in essence 4 times over. Prior to drilling and on an annual basis with the impact tax, during production with the severance tax, at consumption with the gross receipts tax, and finally every year with the businesses and income taxes on any company involved in the drilling. 4 times over. We need that natural gas industry here in Western Pennsylvania, and I am very encouraged to hear so many of you say that you'll vote against that piece because natural gas is important. There's another piece of that that hasn't been recognized yet that I do want to point out. Those companies that have come in here, Representative Dowling pointed out earlier, he talked about Chevron and he talked about Williams. These companies didn't just come in here and start to do their work. They embedded in our communities. We have a huge workforce development effort in Fayette County. These are companies that are invested in every step of that workforce development effort to make sure that we are creating programs that are educating our children. You look in our schools and you see Chevron classrooms, and we have a big Williams program that we do with 7th and 8th graders. These companies are a part of our communities. They've taken responsibility to come in here and help our communities grow. And to think that a tax could push them out, it's just not good for business. I'll just make it that short. Fayette County is not alone. The Commonwealth as a whole is in poor fiscal health simply because our economy is not growing. This tax package would just be a huge step backwards. They'll reduce Pennsylvania's businesses' ability to compete in the global economy and reinvest in the state, and will undoubtedly result in higher prices to consumer end users of their products. I could sit here and go on for a long time. I don't have the fancy statistics that the last 2 folks that were up here pointed out. What I can tell you from the business community standpoint is these taxes are not good. These taxes will hurt everywhere from the largest business in Western Pennsylvania to the person in a household of 1. We need the opportunity to be able to grow our business community. We have a situation in our county right now where our county level organizations and our commissioner's office are working together in a way we never have before. To build business, to seek business, to bring business in here, to bring residents in here, to bring tourists into Fayette County, and to grow our community. To have this kind of an impact put in place, It would be a huge step backwards. I truly hate to see that happen. Our legislators really need to focus on policies that grow the state's economy. Fayette County businesses simply can't afford a tax impact like that. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll move on to Mr. Shark. Bob?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to present some information related to the potential business impact in Pennsylvania and in Fayette County as a result of the tax increases included in House Bill 542 recently passed by the Pennsylvania Senate on July 27th. My name is Bob Shark. I'm the Executive Director of Fay Penn Economic Development Council, the premier economic development agency in Fayette County, and the only such local agency recognized by the Pennsylvania Industrial Development Authority as a certified economic development organization. Fay Penn is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that has operated for over 25 years. Fay Penn's mission is to provide comprehensive second-to-none services to businesses that are starting, expanding, or planning to locate in Fayette County to assist in growing and diversifying our economy. Since its inception, Fay Penn has helped to create or retain over 9,000 jobs as a direct result of its efforts, which have impacted at least another 20,000 jobs that indirectly result from those direct jobs per the so-called multiplier effect. That total number of jobs represents over half of the approximately 55,000 people currently employed in Fayette County's workforce. In that same time frame, Fay Penn has also helped to generate over $1.5 billion in public and private investment in Fayette County. However, despite the best efforts of organizations such as Fay Penn and our local chambers of commerce and redevelopment authorities, it is common knowledge that Fayette County has a long history of being at or near the top of the unemployment rolls for Pennsylvania's 67 counties. The latest data available from July of 2017, generated by the U.S. Department of Labor, shows Fayette County tied with Philadelphia County for the top unemployment spot at 6.9%. Economic growth in Fayette County has simply lagged behind other counties since the recession of 2008, which is a result of several factors that are outside the scope of my testimony today. Similarly, however, at least for the past several years, Pennsylvania has not compared favorably with the majority of other states in terms of what is commonly referred to as its business climate. Pennsylvania is often at the middle or bottom of the pack when various organizations compile surveys each year ranking states according to the components of these business climates. Before I delve into those comparisons that I prepared, I'd like to note that I generated the data I'm about to share from information on the web via various Google searches for Pennsylvania state business rankings. I did not selectively choose my sources to present either a positive or negative perspective on our business climate. I simply went with some of the top search hits, which were mostly from relevant, well-known organizations. In summary, although there were some good economic indicators for Pennsylvania that were available in the surveys I found, they were relatively few compared to the negative indicators. As examples, Forbes' Best States for Business survey in November of 2016 ranked Pennsylvania number 38 overall, meaning only 12 states are worse than Pennsylvania for businesses for a variety of reasons. Individual metrics of the Forbes survey placed Pennsylvania number 38 in labor supply, number 39 in regulatory environment, number 31 in growth prospects, number 26 in economic climate, and number 32 in business costs, which, by the way, includes taxes. U.S. News & World Report's latest Best States survey ranked Pennsylvania's economy number 39. Again, that means only 11 states are ranked worse. CNBC's America's Top States for Business 2017, a scorecard on state economic climate, ranked Pennsylvania number 23 overall, with component rankings of number 34 for cost of doing business, again, that includes taxes, 28 for business friendliness, and number 34 for cost of living. By the way, this number 23 position is unfortunately the highest overall ranking for Pennsylvania that I found. Although there are many other similar survey ranking systems, the final examples I will share at this point are related to business and personal tax rankings. You might ask why personal tax rates are important from a business perspective. There are at least two reasons. About 80% of businesses report their earnings on the individual returns of owners. Higher personal taxes leave those businesses less money to hire workers, give raises, or invest in their businesses. And higher personal tax rates can influence the desirability of living in Pennsylvania, which impacts the size and the quality of our labor force. For business taxes, the Tax Foundation's 2017 State Business Tax Climate Index, Pennsylvania ranks number 24 in terms of its overall business tax structure. However, a significant component of this ranking that is worth noting is Pennsylvania's top corporate tax rate. At 9.9%, Pennsylvania's rate is lower only to Iowa's at 12%, putting us at the number 49 position. Representative Dowling, if I could point out there's a typo in my written testimony that you could possibly correct before scanning, I would appreciate it.
Sure, we can
I
attempt to
subtracted
do
1 from
that.
50 and got 48. Hey, I'm not an accountant. Some personal tax rate comparisons come from WalletHub's 2017's tax rates by state. Pennsylvania is number 41 overall based on effective total state and local tax rates on household income, and dead last when it comes to gasoline taxes per gallon at 58.2 cents. Other tax ranking examples that cause Pennsylvania to be mid-range at best compared to other states with respect to its existing business and personal taxes include a combined state and average local sales tax rate of 6.34%. That puts us at a rank of number 33. State and local general sales tax collections per capita annually of $796. That puts us at number 39. And state and local property tax collections per capita annually of $1,405, a little bit better, where we rank at number 21. The information I've shared obviously depicts a situation that requires improvement on many fronts if Pennsylvania and Fayette County are to revive from their economic doldrums. Specifically, however, as today's topic is related to Pennsylvania's tax structure, it is apparent to me that House Bill 542's approximately $571 million in new taxes will worsen, not help, our current economic conditions in the state and the county. The Tax Foundation I cited earlier provides this summary introduction of the impact of those taxes. Business taxes affect business decisions, job creation and retention, plant location, competitiveness, the transparency of the tax system, and the long-term health of the state's economy. In other words, higher taxes mean lower profits, so states with a lower tax burden will be more attractive to those businesses. For example, Pennsylvania is currently second in the U.S., only to Texas, in natural gas production. That industry in Pennsylvania supports over 320,000 jobs with wages of $23 billion and generates another $44.5 billion in value-added economic impact. As we've heard, Pennsylvania is the only natural gas producing state currently without a severance tax, which is a tax on actual production of gas, but House Bill 542 proposes to add that tax. Pennsylvania does, however, already impose an impact fee, also as we've heard, which is a tax on well drilling. That's equivalent, that impact fee tax is equivalent to more than a 9% tax already levied on Pennsylvania gas producers. Organizations such as the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the Marcellus Shale Coalition, and Energy Tomorrow have argued against the severance tax, citing how existing corporate taxes already put a strain on Pennsylvania's energy competitiveness. I'm certain other presenters today will continue to provide more details related to how the severance tax increases the likelihood that natural gas drillers will seek higher profits outside of Pennsylvania. In closing, I'll recap by saying that Pennsylvania already lags behind the majority of other states in terms of the cost of doing business here. And our tax structure plays a large role in that. Although it's certainly critical for Pennsylvania to balance its budget, adding to that tax burden will certainly not help to start, grow, retain, or attract businesses here. And one final thought with more numbers. The latest data from the U.S. Census Bureau show that Pennsylvania has a total employment of about 5.3 million people, with a total payroll for those workers of $258 billion. That comes out to an average annual wage per Pennsylvania worker of about $48,000. That $571 million in increased taxes that House Bill 542 would remove from business and personal coffers equates to losing the ability to pay wages for about 11,800 Pennsylvania workers. That's about 2,000 more people than the entire population in the city of Uniontown. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Muriel, a follow-up question for you. I know that the Fayette Chamber of Commerce has been an organization that's been supportive of the gas and oil industry, even having authored a white paper years ago as the industry, the Marcellus industry, was moving into the area. I was curious to ask you, as you kind of have your thumb on the pulse of the business community, have we seen recent job loss within that industry, jobs moving to other counties, other areas? And do you speculate that any of that is linked to the rumors, long-lasting rumors of a severance tax in Pennsylvania?
I know that we've lost business in Fayette County. I know we've lost employees. We had an interesting situation occur when the industry moved here, with an influx of folks that came in who used our hotels, and we had new restaurants come into place. And as the workers changed from the Western workers over to the local workers, we saw that impact in the tourism industry. But we've seen a downturn in many levels of industry because of the kind of the flat state of natural gas at current. You know, I told you earlier, I am the eternal optimist. You know that, Representative Dowling. So I talk to these industries, and I know that their desire is to come back, and their plan is to come back. This kind of a fee most definitely would impact that. I would hate to see further job loss when we have such opportunity to grow that industry here, caused by another tax or another levied fee.
Thank you. And Bob, I know recently you have brought someone on board at Fayette Penn to help do site selection. These proposed taxes, in your opinion, will they make that gentleman's job more difficult in bringing people into this region from both out of state, and I know you're even looking at some international expansion within the region?
Definitely. It's probably not the number one driver for a business making a decision on where it's going to locate. That always, in today's economy, is going to be the quality of the workforce. But it's high on the list in terms of the cost of doing business in a particular area. And again, taxes play a large part in that, especially in Pennsylvania. One of the international companies that we were successful in locating here a couple of years ago cited the two main reasons for coming to Fayette County was the abundant and low cost of the utilities here, as well as the cost effectiveness of the workplace. So right there you have living proof right here in Fayette County that certainly made a difference for them to make that decision as to locating where they did. And just to piggyback a little bit on what Muriel talked about, we've had inquiries from companies interested in building hotels here, and they've cited the drop-off in the number of the revenue numbers for the hotels that are already here as a deterrent for not coming in with new expansions. And again, a large part of that drop-off was because of the downturn in the industry, and if you continue to put more taxes on them, that's certainly going to be exacerbated.
Thank you. I know Representative Cook had a question. Representative Cook.
Thank you, Rep. I think one of the most challenging 6 to 7 months in my life has been when government world meets business world. Representative Saccone and I yesterday were sitting on the 17th floor in Pittsburgh listening to Chamber of Commerce members of Pittsburgh, manufacturers, producers, cross-representation. I know we represent part of Washington, part of Fayette, two issues, opioids and jobs. What we're talking about here, it's already caused companies to look outside of Pennsylvania just with what is currently on the table. It's about jobs. Now, one of the people that we heard from yesterday was a steel producer. He had to cut $10 million out of his operating budget 1 year to make it work. And this is horrifying. We've already caused damage without even doing anything yet. So it's not just here in Fayette. it's in Washington, and it's in Allegheny. It's southwestern Pennsylvania that this could impact from. Do we have a sense yet of the number of jobs that we're potentially damaging in our area here?
Based upon this tax,
Mm-hmm.
I don't at this point. I don't. It will be significant.
Yeah, I don't know if you
Will be
could
significant.
separate that out as a single factor for some of the job losses in the gas industry. I mean, there is just a general downturn because the cost has dropped tremendously, and that has taken some of the profit margin out of it.
I think everybody at the table here sort of gets it, if you will. One of the items that we left for the group yesterday, we need to change this conversation from reoccurring income to reoccurring spending. We don't have an income problem, we have a spending problem, and it's frustrating being a business person and dealing with government land. So a sort of a suggestion to get back to your members and parts, legislators need to hear. And trust me, this is about jobs, because we have a horrible climate for business already. This is just going to double down. It's sort of like Walmart saying, let's increase the price of doing our product here and you come shop. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Representative Warner, question or comment?
Thank you, Matt. I just guess I have more of a comment here. First of all, Mario, Bob, I want to thank you for everything that you do here in Fayette County. You guys are great to work with. I know that you're definitely an advocate for small businesses and business in general, and truly thank you for everything that you do. And it kind of hits home, right? Hearing from you guys firsthand, you know, people that advocate and try to bring businesses and advocate for businesses in Fayette County. And not just large corporations. I mean, your focus is on small businesses. And to hear how this tax package will impact Fayette County is extremely frustrating. On the personal level, we've mentioned per person, per family, what this is going to cost. So you're going to have less money in your pocket. And ultimately, we're going to have less jobs. And that's frankly something I don't think that we can afford to do here in Fayette County. So that's why I don't think that we can afford this tax package. But as Representative Cook has mentioned, we need to look at the grander picture here. It's not that we can't afford the tax package, it's that we can't afford the spending that goes along with the tax package. And I think as legislators, we need to start digging our heels in and putting an end to, as Representative Saccone always says, the spending addiction of Harrisburg and the spending madness that we have. And we do have a lot of bills out there to do just that. There is, I've introduced a Taxpayer Protection Act, which limits the amount of money that government can spend. It puts a cap on the general budget every year to a percentage of inflation and population growth. So therefore, we can no longer spend more money. Only exemptions would be in emergencies. We look at performance-based budgeting. We need to analyze what each one of these government agencies are doing and not just every year them saying, well, this is why we need an increase. We need to justify all of their costs. We need to look at government as a whole. We talked earlier that there's the Commonwealth Foundation identified $3 billion of excess spending. We have $800 million of corporate welfare that we could be looking at. And frankly, as legislators, we have to start looking at these budgets and determining how much money we have to spend and not how much money we want to spend. And, you know, it's unfortunate that we are in this situation with this current budget, and it is not a knock on anyone that voted for it, because there was limited spending compared to last year's budget, but people were sold the idea that this was going to be a non-taxed budget. Okay? That the people that voted for it on the premise that we can do this and that there's an agreement that we're going to do this without raising taxes. And you heard that from a lot of people. And now here we are the Senate passing a tax revenue plan. It is my personal opinion, when the agreements fell apart, when it was determined how this budget would be paid for, that the governor should have upheld his constitutional duty and stopped the overspending in the current budget to be online with current revenues, so that we would not be in the situation where we are right now. It's easy to spend money, folks. It's a lot harder to go get it. And to that point, we need to stop spending and wasting people's money, hard-working taxpayers of Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Warner. Thank you, Ms. Nuttall and Mr. Shark, for your testimony today. Excuse me, before you do move, there is one additional question from Representative Pyle.
Yeah, I have a question. Muriel, I think you brought it up. 600 million in new taxes the Senate billed into what the House had sent over to them. I don't know if this is an opinion or a factual base that you can answer yes or no, but when we brought in that 31.46 spending plan back in April, we were balanced. We hit it. And as Ryan brought up, I'm one of those guys on appropriations that voted this. The complete inference was the Senate would be comply, they would be complicit with video gaming terminals, which we estimated at $350 to $450 million. We also factored in privatization of liquor, which could generate up to $2 billion. All of this got tossed out on its ear. And I'll be honest with you, I'm one of those guys that feels I just kind of got sold into a bill of goods. You know, I don't know where that old lady is that says, where's the beef? But to me, it looks an awful lot like we brought in a balanced budget from the House side, and the Senate decided to spend $600 million more. And now we got to come up with a way to pay for their stuff. Could not agree with you more on the effect of gas. And I think what's being glossed over is cost of energy is one of the main drivers of any business's operation. And we're not talking just about the big Shell plant up in Beaver, which will absorb a lot of our gas. But I'm talking about water trucks, guys that haul sand, guys that work at the rail yards, because our sand doesn't work for fracking. We like to train it in from Arkansas, where they have a special jagged edge sand. Just a couple other things. Right now, you brought up the drillers being in Ohio. Is it coincidence that when Governor Kasich went to them and asked for a severance tax, Ohio's legislature shot him down? And now all the drillers that used to be here are there. I'm a simple man. The Permian Basin in West Texas right now is where the big drillers, unencumbered by the regulatory environment in Pennsylvania. I mean, ours is one of the worst. You said 39th, Bob. I handled a lot of coal stuff. I remember when we were down around 44, 45. I don't know where they think this is going. If they are trying to kill this industry and send it elsewhere, this is how you do it. Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate your testimony. I was going to do an air bump there.
Thank you both for your time. For those of you, once again, joining us via the audio-only feed on WMBS 590 AM and 101.1 FM, you are listening to the Pennsylvania Taxpayer Caucus informal hearing on the Senate budget package. Our next piece of testimony will be offered by Columbia Gas of PA and Maryland. We have the Manager of Government Affairs, Scott Waitlevich. Am I close, Scott? Yes, you are. Thank you. And before we allow Scott to give his testimony, I did want to make reference to a few elected officials at the local level or at another state level that are in the room with us today. Chief of Staff for Senator Stefano Ben Wren is here with us, listening and intently taking notes, I'm sure. We are very happy that his boss voted no on HB 542 when it went through the Senate. Also, we have Commissioner Zimmerlink, Nancy Glad, who's a Laurel Highlands School District Director, and we'll hear from her later, and Connellsville City Councilwoman Melissa Tazan. So we welcome them and thank them for taking the time to listen to what's going on with the state budget. With that, Scott, I would turn it over for your testimony.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to provide some specifics and input on the impact to our customers of the House Bill 542 and the tax proposals that are in there. A number of items have been covered, so I'll be a little brief. I have more specific information in the packets that are included in your testimony. But let me just again say that we have done our analysis from the customer's view and the customer's impact. Columbia Gas of Pennsylvania is a natural gas distribution company. We are a utility that provides natural gas to homes and businesses throughout 26 counties. In Pennsylvania, we have over 426,000 residential, industrial, and commercial customers, and we maintain over 4,700 miles of pipe to make sure we have a reliable and safe distribution system. So as we analyze the tax provisions, we certainly have concerns with both the severance tax, which has been mentioned that will hit the consumer at the front end of natural gas delivery, thereby rising or increasing the commodity cost, which is a concern. Our customers have benefited with low and stable natural gas prices for the last few years. When you look at the prices in 2007, 2008 compared to now, they're saving over $1,000 a year. So any severance tax increase will also increase the commodity cost. Specifically, we looked at the gross receipts tax that has been mentioned that will be reimposed on natural gas users under this proposal. Our average customer, who spends about $90 per month on natural gas, will pay an additional $65 a year through the gross receipts tax. And as you look at our customer base as a whole, that's a $34 million per year tax on our customer base then throughout Pennsylvania. More importantly, as you look at the impact to our customers, low and moderate income customers are more adversely affected by the GRT. They tend to have homes that are older, less energy efficient. They don't have, new windows, new furnaces, newer insulation to help keep conservation measures in place and maybe reduce their bills. So in fact, they use more natural gas. Therefore, they're going to pay more in the GRT. The GRT also has an adverse impact on our industrial and commercial customers. Our analysis shows that, our business customers will pay our larger ones as far as manufacturers and other companies will pay anywhere between $20,000 per year to $51,000 per year. A significant additional tax burden that suddenly is reimposed on them after many years of not having the GRT on natural gas. State and local governments, of course, will also pay additional costs in seeing their utility bills increase, as well as school districts, colleges, and universities. Specifically, we analyzed one school district in Westmoreland County, just one complex that they have where they've recently updated and built a elementary school, a middle school, and a high school on one single complex, and they're looking at an additional $3,600 per year in gross receipts tax. And we have a large institution of higher learning in central Pennsylvania that we know will pay more than $43,000 a year in the GRT. Certainly natural gas has been an economic benefit. Our low energy prices, we've been able to recruit and retain businesses here in Pennsylvania, and we need to keep that competitive advantage. Increasing the gross receipts tax and the severance tax also adversely affects natural gas companies like Columbia, who are expediting mainline replacement. We have a mandate from both the federal government and the state government to get old pipe out of the ground to maintain the reliability of our system. Over the last 10 years, we've invested more than $1.3 billion back into Pennsylvania in new mainline pipe. And I mentioned the impact on this is $34 million. Well, it's about $1 million a mile to replace mainline pipe. So should this tax be imposed, we will now have 34 miles less of pipe that we can replace throughout our service territory. One of the other aspects as we looked at this is, from a public policy standpoint, natural gas users in Pennsylvania, only about 51% of Pennsylvania homes use natural gas to heat their homes. So that means that the cost of state government is specifically being put onto natural gas users, whereas other types of energy, propane, fuel oil, will not pay a gross receipts tax to help fund government. So you wonder if this is really good public policy to do that. And then a number of initiatives have been made in Harrisburg to get more natural gas to unserved or underserved rural communities so they can get the economic benefit of it, and this seems counter to that type of initiative. So ultimately, we would ask you to oppose the severance tax and the gross receipts tax on natural gas in House Bill 542, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Representative Grove.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Obviously, that $34 million on the gross receipts tax, we're kind of at an all-time low of natural gas prices, correct?
Correct.
Because of the abundance. How long ago was the peak of that amount? When did that peak? Do you
As
recall?
far as the commodity costs,
Yeah.
you mean? It was in 2007, 2008 that commodity prices were anywhere from $13 to $15 an MCF or 1,000 cubic feet.
Okay. And what is it now? About 3?
It ranges, I mean, 3 is the NYMEX, kind of the market price. Once it gets to the consumer, you're talking about maybe $4 to $5 an MCF. You know, that's one of the other aspects of this. You talked about producers leaving Pennsylvania. One of the benefits that occurred over the last 10 years due to Marcellus Shale is most of the gas that utilities were providing to their customers 10, 15 years ago was coming from the Gulf Coast. Now the vast majority is coming regionally or from Pennsylvania. So that has taken easily $1 to $2 an MCF off what was called transportation costs, getting gas from the Gulf Coast through the pipelines up to Pennsylvania. Now we have local, producers providing gas to utilities, and that's saving customers monies as well. One of the interesting facts that the Marcellus Shale Coalition has put together that may be helpful to you. In 2011, there were 111 rigs operating in Pennsylvania. That dropped to 13 in 2016 based on the economics. Now that has rebounded a little bit to into the 30s right now, but certainly, as companies look where to put their investments, Pennsylvania has become less attractive. And then regarding the impact tax, the Marcellus Shale Coalition's analysis, $173 million has been raised by the impact tax. Now that is more than the severance taxes raised in Ohio, West Virginia, Arkansas, and Colorado combined. So when folks say, the industry is not paying its fair share, they should look at, data such as that to really, determine if that's the case or not.
Yeah. So at some point, the MCF, that price will skyrocket. I mean, it's cyclical, right? At some point down the line, that's going to spike. If this gross receipts tax at $34 million per year could easily jump if market conditions change.
Yes, if the commodity price increases, the GRT would increase as well. Now, it's tough to know what the market may do, but, and will we ever see in the short term $13 to $15? Probably not, but I think some analysis has it going back to the $5 or $6 an MCF range.
And if I'm not mistaken, there's a 6% sales tax on top of that GRT? Or is that just the telecom?
Not on the sales tax. There are other taxes that are imposed that that utilities then use on their bills, but not a sales tax.
Okay. And is that $34 million also calculated on top of the proposed severance tax, or is that just as is on the gross receipts tax?
That is as the prices are currently today based on our analysis. So it's tough for us to know what the severance tax may do to the commodity price at this point.
And then a lot of the energy creators in Pennsylvania are using shale natural gas in the natural gas burners currently, correct? Would you know that?
As far as what goes?
The actual energy creation, the creation of electricity.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. For example, there are a number of electric generators that are being proposed or being built in Pennsylvania that are natural gas driven. Any of the new power plants that are either being proposed or being built currently are natural gas. Now, there is an exemption in this legislation for electric generation as far as not having to pay the GRT. But if you're an industrial company that's using a lot of energy, either electric or gas or a combo of both, you're going to feel it through increased utility prices.
Yeah, so I mean, those generation, you'll see an increase in the severance tax, so that'll drive up your generation costs, and then on the back end, you're going to get hit with a GRT on your electric bill, and if you heat your home, you get a nice GRT on your natural gas, and then I'm pretty sure Verizon, T-Mobile, all their businesses, they utilize natural gas and electricity to run their business. So their
Correct.
costs will increase. Plus, you get an extra GRT tax on top of that. And if I'm not mistaken, the sales tax, if you get your cell phone bill, there's a sales tax and the GRT. And the GRT is actually calculated in the sales tax price. So there's a huge compounding effect when you mix all these taxes together for the average taxpayer. With this entire package.
Yes, correct. As I learned as I went to our business experts to say, okay, what will be the impact? They had to explain to me it's a compounding effect. So it's not just 5.7% times X, it's X plus plus plus, whatever the additional costs are built into that.
Scott, we want to thank you for your testimony today. I want to thank you in particular as a utility provider for coming and being with us. Unfortunately, I had invited a colleague from another utility provider here today to join us, and their corporation felt that because these taxes were passed on to the end user, to the consumer, that appearing before us wasn't worth their time today. I'm extremely disappointed with that energy supplier. But I thank Columbia Gas for looking out for your constituency.
Well, we appreciate the opportunity to provide you this data, and hopefully as you talk to your colleagues back in Harrisburg next week, you can enlighten them on the impact of this.
Thank you. Representative Pyle, I believe, has a question for Representative Grove. While we are moving on to that, I would invite Wesley, Carey, and also Mike up to the table, as we'll be taking your testimony as a panel as well. Thank you.
Rep. Grove, I appreciate something you just brought up that's been a question to me, and I think you're more knowledgeable than I. My family has the Comcast triple play. We have internet, phone, and television all delivered on the same bill. Your interpretation, would that be 6.5, 6.5, 6.5 for a total of 19.5% on my cable, phone, internet bill?
I guess it depends on how they break it down. If they tax each one individually, but it's a compounding effect anyway, you're going to pay a much higher tax burden on that, plus a higher sales tax because your sales tax is calculated on those gross receipts tax as well.
Wow.
So I haven't heard anyone ever say, my cell phone bill is really low. I've never heard it. And, I have young kids that don't have cell phones, and I know your daughters probably do. I don't know if you carry that on your family budget, but it's expensive and it continues to go up. And, at the end of the day, the consumer pays all these taxes. The businesses will not.
Thanks for the clarification.
If you're just joining us on the audio-only rebroadcast on WMBS 590 AM or 101.1 FM, you're listening to the Pennsylvania Taxpayer Caucus hearing which is taking place in Uniontown, PA, at the Park Inn by Radisson. We are moving on to testimony, which we've kind of grouped together, but our first testifier will be Carrie Drangula, General Counsel of XO Energy. Then we'll be moving on to Wesley Allen, CEO of Red Wolf Energy, and finally Mike, I'm going to butcher your last name. Schubiger, President and CEO of Sesco. Once we've heard testimony from all three individuals, we will open it up for questions from the representatives. Carrie?
Thank you, Representative Dowling. If it's okay with you, we'd like to reorder our testimony a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry. If it's okay with you, we're hoping that Wes could actually start with the testimony. He's going to talk about some of the practical and economic challenges of the virtual transaction tax. I'm going to follow with the not-so-interesting legal implications.
Okay, we'd be happy to use whatever order from the three of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Dowling and the Tax Caucus for allowing us the opportunity to speak today. My name is Wesley Allen. I'm CEO of Red Wolf Energy Trading. We are a small energy trading shop headquartered in Raleigh, North Carolina. And before we delve too much into the details of what a virtual energy transaction tax is, I thought it might be helpful if we back up a little bit and talk about the electricity markets, why they exist, and what's the purpose of the virtual transactions that exist in these marketplaces. There are several RTOs and ISOs scattered across the United States. PJM, which stands for Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland, happens to be one of them. But there's also Midwest ISO, California ISO, ERCOT, New York, and SPP. And if we back up and think about how all the virtual transactions started, back around 1998, year 2000, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission decided that it would be a good idea to have wholesale competition in the electricity markets, to move away from the vertically integrated utilities, the monopolies that existed. And in doing so, they created these ISOs, PJM being one of them, and PJM runs the day-ahead and the real-time energy markets. The day-ahead market, what's the purpose of the day-ahead market? It's pre-planning. It's about planning for tomorrow, what electricity needs are, where they're located, and the dispatch of electric power plants. And then the real-time energy market is what actually occurs in the real time. The benefit of day ahead is pre-planning. Anytime you can acquire natural gas or fuel on a day ahead basis, you're going to pay less than if you try to acquire it in the real time. The purpose of the virtual transactions is arbitrage between the day ahead and real time energy markets. So what we're trying to do, meaning arbitrage, we're closing, converging the day ahead and real time so that your plan is actually representative of what the real time, what actually occurs in the day. And so our company, along with the others represented here, what we do is we try to find those arbitrage opportunities. We try to improve the day-ahead planning to match what's going to occur in the real time. And we use sophisticated models to do this. It's not throwing darts on a dartboard. I think practically everybody who runs these small companies like mine and like Sesco and XO are all former traders from utilities. We grew up trading these markets. Now, to get into a little bit about what this virtual transaction tax is, if I understand it correctly, it's a 5% gross receipt tax. And if you look at the market data from 2016, which is published by the Independent Market Monitor for PJM, the average profitability, well, there's three types of transactions. There's incremental offers, that's selling into the day ahead. There's decremental bids, that's buying the day ahead. And then there's the UTC transaction, which stands for up to congestion. And all that is simply a basis trade between two geographic locations. And if you look at the profitability, the average profitability of INCs and DECs for 2016, it averaged 41 cents per megawatt. If you look at the average profitability of UTCs during the same time period, it averaged 11 cents per megawatts. A 5% gross receipts tax would be approximately $1.50 per megawatt. So you don't have to have a PhD in economics to kind of figure out what would happen. You have products that average, pennies per megawatt, and you're taxing them at a rate, or proposing to tax them at a rate, significantly higher than that. Most of the volume that's done in virtual products is done by small shops like ours. It's not done by the large utilities. So if you end up taxing it at this rate, it's just going to go away. There's not going to be any volume. You're not going to get any revenue. What will I do personally, or my company? We will shut down our operations in the PJM market. And PJM is not just Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland. It encompasses 13 states and the District of Columbia. And what kind of impact will that have? You'll see less competition. Part of the purpose of having these virtual transactions is to mitigate market power that naturally exists in the electricity market. We discipline the offers that are made by generators. And if you lose that discipline, they will have the opportunity to exercise market power. And what does that mean for the ratepayer? It means prices will go up. There's less competition. Competition is good for the markets. And essentially you're eliminating, or potentially eliminating, 90% or more of all the competition that exists in these markets. Now, the first half of this meeting, we were talking about natural gas and what happens in there. One thing I would express to all of you is that there's been a push for the United States, I'm sure it's the same for Pennsylvania, to get back into manufacturing. What happened to all of our manufacturing jobs? Well, United States, Pennsylvania, we can, and I don't think we want to compete globally in labor cost. But one thing that we can do to make up for a lot of that ground is by cheap, reliable energy. So if you want to tax energy, you're taxing your jobs, and it's going to have a profound impact. But yeah, just to go back to I think the one thing I want to really hammer home here is that the average profitability is pennies, and you're talking dollars of tax. It's just not going to happen. It's not. People are going to get laid off, and we're going to move our operations to other ISOs, other parts of the country. And this is going to have a profound impact, not just on the ratepayers in the state of Pennsylvania, but also Maryland, Ohio, the entire footprint of PJM. I believe the CFO of PJM has sent a letter to the governor expressing those points. And I would encourage y'all and ask you to please listen. And turning the mic over to Carrie.
Thank you. I would call attention to the representatives. The letter referenced is available in your packet and will also be available at repdowling.com tomorrow.
Thank you again for allowing us to present in front of you. Just wanted to run through some of the legal challenges that are associated with this proposed tax. As Wes had mentioned, the wholesale electricity markets are part of interstate commerce. PJM is, as Wes said, comprised of 13 member states as well as the District of Columbia. And the challenge that's presented there is that wholesale electricity is not just happening within Pennsylvania. It's actually happening across a much broader footprint, PJM's footprint. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission also has exclusive jurisdiction over wholesale electricity markets. Over time, the courts, and this is the U.S. Supreme Court, have repeatedly rebuffed attempts by the states to intrude on FERC's jurisdiction. Last year, in April of 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court held that a Maryland program that would encourage the development of in-state energy generation was preempted by the Federal Power Act, which provides that the exclusive jurisdiction over the wholesale electricity markets are with FERC. This was the Hughes v. Talon case, and there are a couple cases that I will refer to that are mentioned in my written testimony. It's important to note here that if this tax is ultimately approved, PJM cannot administer the tax without filing a tariff change at FERC. And given that there is federal case law and precedent that's not favorable, we think that that's going to play against the proposed tax. The U.S. Supreme Court has repeatedly found that state laws that interfere with a federal agency's oversight of regulated markets are simply unconstitutional. And again, there are a number of cases that I've referred to. In my written testimony, I'm not going to go through them all here, but there's one in particular that I want to call your attention to. It's the case Maryland v. Louisiana. This was adjudicated back in 1981. It's been determined to be precedent over quite an extensive period of time. In this particular case, the Supreme Court struck down a Louisiana law that imposed a tax on the federally regulated natural gas market. The law attempted to impose a first use tax on certain uses of natural gas that were brought into the state. Here, the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, found that Louisiana had attempted to usurp the authority of FERC and that the law interfered with FERC's exclusive jurisdiction. Importantly, and this also relates to the virtual transaction tax, the court also rejected Louisiana's claims that the commerce was intrastate rather than interstate. Louisiana claimed that there were breaks in the nature of the commerce and the nature of the gas flow. The court disagreed and found that the flow of gas from wellhead to consumer, even though interrupted by certain events, was anything but a continual flow of gas in interstate commerce. Here, the proposed tax on virtual transactions appears to be exactly the type of state taxation action that the Supreme Court shot down in Maryland v. Louisiana. The wholesale price of electricity in PJM's markets, as Wes touched on, both physical and financial, is established by FERC-approved tariffs. Like physical transactions, the virtual transactions that we've talked about are deemed to be a part of interstate commerce. I think that arguments have been made that these transactions can be segregated and categorized as only occurring in Norristown, Pennsylvania. Norristown is where PJM settlement servers are located. We would argue that that is simply not the case. These transactions are occurring over a broader geography and not just in Norristown, PA. So these transactions are, in fact, subject to FERC's jurisdiction. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike?
Hi, excuse me. Hi, I'm Mike Schubiger. I'm CEO of Sesco Enterprises. We have offices in Greensburg, Pennsylvania here, just real close by. And, you know, Wes did a great job with the history of the markets themselves and how, as virtual traders, we participate in. So I just wanted to briefly touch on a few things, referencing the paper that Suzanne Doherty wrote that you guys all have a copy of. They talk about the 8713, where 87% of the transactions that are currently done would not be profitable, and 13% could potentially be profitable. With that, on those 13%, in a very, very volatile market, the tax rate would be 48%. The virtual bid tax would be a 48% tax on that. So it would be very punitive. And Wes, myself, EXO, you know, we're tax conduits. You know, we're not taxpayers. We're passing that on to the consumer in our bids and offers. So the very small amount of transactions, if we chose to do them, okay, would be passed on in higher costs. So I wanted to emphasize that so that you understood that. So when you read the paper, exactly what that meant. But we're with Red Wolf Energy as well, is that we have three groups that you know, transact in the PJM markets, and we've done all the math in 2015 and 2016 and so far in 2017, and almost all of our trades would be wiped out by this tax considerably in a punitive way. And people use that word before, punitive. It's a good word. So. One of the things that Wes also touched on was the market power issue, how overall prices will be passed on to the consumers and municipalities. So it's important for you all to understand that the municipalities will pay higher electricity rates. There won't be any incentives to get the day ahead economics, as Wes said, correct. So volatility will just rise, prices will rise. Generators can charge whatever they want. There's no one to keep them in check, as Wes pointed out. And if you ask about, Wes touched briefly on the history, but virtual bids, the reason why the market was created was to create lower costs to consumers, to provide proper investment signals, to promote smart investments in new technologies, new equipment, upgrades to existing equipment. That consistent price signal is very, very important for people to make sure that they're going to recover their investment. Anyone who's a business person, which I think we all are, it's very important to have somebody who's going to keep the prices stable in the day-ahead market, promote a proper price signal so that you can have job growth and technological advances. And this virtual bid tax, because it's punitive, will remove us from the market and therefore, raise prices, and there won't be any incentives to keep the prices low. And there was a previous example. I think, there's probably some paperwork out there, but I think it was September of 2014. There was a potential fee associated with an up-to congestion trade, as Wes had pointed out. And the day that that fee was, tax was announced, there was a reduction of over 80% of the trades the next day. So you're going to see the exact same thing happen. It was over 80%, it happened in one day. So therefore, again, we saw increased volatility, we saw increased prices, and you see increased risk to the market too. So one last comment is, every market monitor that we know, every ISO has promoted and applauded the participation of well-capitalized and the solid risk management strategies of power marketers that participate in their markets. They are the lubrication in the engine we call electricity trading that keeps the incentives aligned for all participants to promote a robust and competitive market for the consumer. And that's what we do. And this tax will, destroy that ability. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all three for your testimony. I know we have a couple questions. First, we'll be moving to Representative Rick Saccone. Rick?
Thank you. Carrie, I want to ask you if I'm understanding this correctly. So since this tax has legal problems, legal complications, we may not even collect any money from it, actually, because it could be overruled, could be thrown out. We've gone through this before in budgets when Ed Rendell was going to tax I-80 or toll I-80, and he spent $300 million in a budget that we never collected any money on, and then we were short because we'd already spent that money, assuming it was already in the budget and we already spent it. I'm worried this is going to be another example where we're going to, if this were to pass, which I'm obviously not going to vote for, but if it were to pass, it would be an example of we're going to count on money coming in from a tax, one of many taxes in this budget, and it's going to be accounted for as, okay, it's okay to spend all this money because we're going to pay for it with part of it by this tax, and then we're not going to get that money, and so we're going to be short again, and then who's going to make that up? The taxpayers again are going to get hit because of our miscalculation because of the legal problems on this one tax. Am I right in that?
That's 100% correct. The reality is that a lot of money would be spent. First off, as both Wes and Mike pointed out, and I can speak on behalf of Exo Energy, all of the energy traders would exit the markets immediately. What Mike spoke about was just an inkling. It was a point at which, in 2014, I guess, yeah, at that point, the tax had not even been imposed. It was just a threat of imposition that drove the market to nothing. From 80% of the market was decimated. So same thing would happen here. A lot of money would be spent because PJM would have to go through the process of filing a tariff change at FERC. FERC would then, I can tell you that litigation would ensue immediately. We would be involved in that. I'm sure that SESCO and Red Wolf would be as well. Thousands, millions of dollars would potentially be spent. So not only will you not have a tax to collect, you're going to have all of these other costs that are ultimately going to be borne by the consumer. It's just a terrible idea.
Okay, now there's one other part of this I didn't understand, and Wes, you talked about it in the beginning. And Mike, you actually said that this cost would be passed through to the consumers. You're just a conduit. So then if it's passed through, help me understand why then you would just pack up shop and leave. Why aren't you just passing the cost through and keep trading, passing the cost on? I didn't quite understand that.
Sure. What Mike was alluding to is that when we put in our bids or our offers into the day-ahead market, any assumption of a tax, if there is a tax, would be, we would have to have that expected profit margin in those transactions in order to transact. I would hazard a guess that that would evaporate 95% of the total transaction volume.
So you wouldn't be able to bid at a competitive rate because you're calculating in a tax that you're going to have to pay.
Right, exactly.
Okay, I got you now. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Representative Saccone. Representative Pyle has a question, I believe, for Wesley.
Well, Wesley, Mike, Gary, okay, back to the virtual transaction tax. This is the thing I have to admit I don't have mastery of yet, but I do understand how PJM functions. I've been there. I love the big board. It's really cool. When the EDCs, electric distribution companies, in my area, it's West Penn Power, okay, part of First Energy. When those guys contact PJM to buy the next day's electrical supply, okay, they contract to buy so many megawatts at so many dollars and pennies, and then they essentially go out off of that wholesale and retail it to the consumers making a penny a house or whatever it works out to, okay? Are you telling me that if West Penn Power does its job and tries to get the lowest cost electricity for our consumers, and say they set on a price that's an even $1, but then a half hour later something big happens and the price of electricity drops, and those guys go back in and bid a second time, you're saying this virtual transaction tax will actually absorb any savings West Penn Power might have been able to get by bargaining for a better market price? Am I following this right? I would see that virtual transaction tax adding to that cost. And when you said companies would just leave the state, that was what my brain connected. They're going to make trading electricity impossible. So once you lock in at the one buy rate, you can never reach for the lower rate for your consumers. So
Let me try to do a better job of explaining how this works.
please talk to me like a dumb kid. This is new. I can tell you what a mile of road made out of anything costs, but this is new.
It is abstract, to say the very least. The way it works is that West Penn Power, First Energy, as well as all the generators and us as well,
Sure.
We all have to submit our bids and offers by a certain time. And then a certain number of hours later, PJM clears the market and tells what the clearing prices are for that particular area. So there's not necessarily an opportunity for West Penn Power to go out and rebid. Now, let me try to explain what the impact of this would be. Well, interestingly enough, one thing I would point out, and it's kind of an aside, but I would encourage you all to look at, the average price of wholesale electricity right now is ridiculously cheap. I would say $30, $35 a megawatt. I would encourage you to take a look at your residential rates.
Equates to 3.5 cents.
Yeah, it's 3.5 cents a kilowatt, and then ask yourself, what are you paying on the residential side? If you convert it, the residential cost of electricity to the wholesale cost, you're paying about $100 a megawatt. The wholesale price is 30. All right, so just bear that in mind. But so West Penn or whoever would go out and bid into the day ahead. A couple hours later, PJM will tell them what volume they cleared and at what price. They're willing to pay up to a certain level. The market power concerns that I was discussing aren't an illusion.
No.
If you all remember the polar vortex of 2014, the independent market monitor and PJM found instances of market power that existed at coal plants within PJM territory. And what those coal plants were doing is, the market was screaming. There was a tremendous amount of volatility. Electric use was through the roof. There was problems getting natural gas. And so electricity prices were really high. And what I mean by market power is economic withholding. So a generator within the PJM footprint says that they're only willing to sell at a astronomically high price. They have market power, so that's what the price clears at. And so they can control the day-ahead settlement price. And so if you think about it from West Penn Power's point of view, if there's a generator nearby that has market power, if there's no virtual transactions there to discipline their offers, then they can charge whatever price they want. And that drives up that wholesale price. So that's how it would impact West Penn. Now, what's interesting with a fully integrated utility, they've been split. And so they have a generation company, they have a distribution company, they have a retail arm, but they're all under the same parent organization. So, they benefit by higher prices.
Can I just expand on that?
Please.
Yeah, so one other way that it can actually affect, and if you walk through this, is Wes had talked about the amount of investment that our companies make in modeling the power grid, right? And hiring, really bright people, getting technology, getting offices like ours is in Greensburg here in PA, and really being capitalized properly to do this, right? So when we run these models, we take a good look at what we really think demand is the next day. And there are forecasts by PJM every day, and they'll tell us what they think the forecasts are. In some way, those forecasts are off, in our opinion, right? So So we have the ability, okay, to, to bid in the market, just like West Penn would be, to make sure that we turn on generation in the day ahead to keep prices lower.
Right.
Because what happens is, if we don't make that proper, investment and proper signal, what could end up happening in real time when they turn on peakers and those gas prices are back up at $14 or they're back up at $10, you could be looking at 5 to 10 times the price of power the next day that when West Penn has to pay. During the polar vortex, you saw that quite often, and all of those costs are, again, passed on to the consumer. So if we're not there to right-size the market, you have a generator who has no incentive to keep the price low, okay, and you have a municipality that wants to buy at a low price. We're there to provide that equilibrium. So, the FERC does a great job. Even PJM does their job in the sense of making sure that we're properly capitalized. We have the right team in place. We have to submit org charts. We have to submit credit manuals, risk manuals, how we operate our organization. So we're already under, regulatory scrutiny and oversight, both at the, the state and federal level, and these taxes would wipe that out. And we just showed you, West did a great job in saying, if we're not there, the incentives aren't aligned. Prices will only go one place. Okay?
So those 11 base plants we closed a couple of years ago, is this the part where we're getting bit in the butt? Thank you, Chairman.
Was that a question? I wasn't sure.
That was a really snarky statement. I had one of those power plants, and I got to tell you, I spoke to some of my colleagues before we came in. I lost 150 jobs at Armstrong Station. Yeah. Another 100 dredging the river. And now we're projecting 700 to 800 more jobs out of the Armstrong gas field. We can't keep doing this. So I'm ready to fight.
Yeah, I would take a look at, where the incentives lie, where the tax credits lie. It has nothing to do with virtual energy or the trades that we make, but there's an awful lot of tax credits that go to some renewables, and that's put a tremendous amount of pressure on the baseload generation.
Thank you, Representative Pyle. We'll move on to a question from Representative Grove.
Thank you. Very enlightening. Thank you so much. This kind of crept up and everyone was like, what? So we really appreciate your testimony on this. Wesley, I'm going to read part of your actual testimony here. First page, bottom paragraph. We understand that the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue has determined although physical electricity transactions cannot be reasonably taxed, virtual financial transactions could be subject to a levy because they are allegedly only transacted in Norristown, Pennsylvania, where PJM's market settlement services are located and allegedly do not have a direct connection to the physical grid. Now, PJM has two, I'll say, bunkers in Pennsylvania, right? And then they have kind of like the back ends, HR, they have servers. How easy is it to move those servers out of Norristown, Pennsylvania, and move it to New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and then there's no more nexus in Norristown, Pennsylvania? I mean, that would basically...
It's a great question for PJM. I wouldn't want to answer in their place, but there's been talk circulating in the industry that it's a couple computers and a dozen employees that would need to be relocated to Delaware. And most, most of the meetings, stakeholder meetings that PJM has are not in Norristown. They're actually in Delaware already. That's why I would lean to think that they occur there. One thing, point of clarification, when we're looking at where we transact in the PJM footprint, there's approximately 12,000 different pricing locations. That means, every city, every town, every power plant, every substation has its own price, both in the day-ahead and the real-time energy markets. They're not all in Norristown. They're scattered across the 13 states in the District of Columbia. So when I'm, thinking about taking a position for tomorrow, they're never in Norristown. I mean, it's Washington, D.C. It's It's in Virginia. It's all over the place. It has nothing really to do with Norristown. That just happens to be where the computers are. That's it.
Thank you.
Okay. We thank you for your testimony today. This was one of the first times we were able to vet and discuss the virtual financial transactions, and that meant a great deal. Rest assured that while there are only several of us here today from the House, we will share this information in great detail with our colleagues, both via your written testimony and in the video if they should so happen to choose to watch it. We do have one more person to testify today, and that is a taxpayer of the 51st District, Nancy Glad. She's also a member of her local board of directors for her school district. We'd invite her up to the dais. While she's making her way up, I will once again remind those joining us on the audio-only rebroadcast on WMBS 590 AM and 101.1 FM that you are listening to the Pennsylvania Taxpayer Caucus hearing in Uniontown, Pennsylvania. And we will move on to Nancy's testimony at this time. Thank you for being with us here today, Nancy.
Thank you for allowing me to present today. I'm a taxpayer. I am the mother of 6, and I am a school board director of the Laurel Highlands School Board. The Senate tax proposal, as we have discussed here today, adds new or additional taxes to natural gas, electricity, fireworks, online shopping, telephones, and telecommunications. As a taxpayer and a member of the Laurel Highlands School Board, I'm here to ask you to respectfully vote no on additional taxes. I have neighbors and friends who lived on a fixed income, paycheck to paycheck, and an additional $180 per year per family of 4 would literally break their banks. However, beyond household pocketbooks, I'm concerned about the school district I represent. Our schools are heated primarily with boilers that run on natural gas. We rely heavily on telecommunications, and we are actually moving to a one-to-one initiative where every student will receive a tablet, so that the lights, the computers, and those tablets will run on electricity. The cost of these tax increases to business facilities and public buildings such as school would be substantial. These increases could be detrimental to our already shoestring budget, and we already have these voted on. They are in place now. These tax increases could divert money that could be spent on educating students in the classroom to higher utility bills. I am unclear as to why you would raise the general education line item in the budget, then impose taxes to pay for that increase on local school districts, rendering some of these increases irrelevant. I know I was here to talk about the impact of these tax increases on taxpayers in Fayette County, but I don't know that I can take this opportunity without asking you to please cut spending in the future. I want to call for additional transparency. Nathan Benefield of the Commonwealth Foundation has reported that the total operating budget for Pennsylvania exceeds $80 billion. That is confusing because the budget being discussed and reported on is $32 billion. However, in addition to the general fund, there is what many refer to as the shadow budget, which accounts for $49 billion in spending. This shadow budget includes $28.7 billion in federal funds, $4.7 billion in special funds, and $15.3 billion in other state funds. I have heard the rumor that spending is generally level, but spending is far from level. Increases are just being hidden from the average taxpayer. Spending has been shifted out of the general fund and into the shadow budget. As a taxpayer, I am calling for transparency. I am worried that moving more and more of the state budget offline into a shadow budget moves us in the wrong direction. Governing should be not done in the shadows, but in the light of day. The total state operating budget for 2016-2017 represents about 12.3% of Pennsylvania's personal income. In 2000, it was only 10.7%, and in 1970, it was just 8.6%. The $80 billion total operating budget costs Pennsylvania taxpayers $25,134 per family of 4. Since I am a family of 8, we will double that figure. Since 2001, Pennsylvania's operating budget has grown by 103%, while personal income has only grown by 78% in that period. New or additional taxes to natural gas, electricity, fireworks, online shopping, telephones, and telecommunications further exacerbates a problem we have been living with here for a long time. We are being overtaxed. And who will be affected by these increases? I think the Washington Observer reporter answers that question well in an editorial where they answered questions all taxpayers, asked themselves. They wrote, do you heat your house with natural gas? Your taxes are going up. Do you use electricity for fancy things such as lights and air conditioning? Once again, your taxes are going up. Do you like to talk to people over the telephone? Yes, indeed, your taxes are going up. We are a community here with an aging population, with many of our residents living on fixed incomes. We are unable to shoulder the burden of any additional taxes. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you for your passionate testimony. We're going to start with a question from Representative Saccone.
Thank you, Matt. This is more of a comment, but Nancy, I want you to know that we do hear you and all of those that are listening out there that aren't with us today but are listening, all those taxpayers, that yes, most people don't know, most taxpayers don't know about the dark budget, the shadow budget, which consists of over 200 siloed funds that money goes off into that nobody really pays attention to except those that are really, really involved in the budget themselves. But there's another part of this dark budget that we haven't touched on that's actually in the general fund budget, and it's called the fiscal code. And that fiscal code, it determines where money is spent from the general fund budget. And there's a lot of what we used to call WHAMs that are specified in that fiscal code, where money will be diverted to this purpose or that purpose. Many of us don't even know unless we really take the time, and Representative Grove has taken the time to ferret out where some of these things go, because there'll be very general items in the fiscal code. It'll say, $300,000 to an organization in the county of the third class and with a town of the city of the third class that has this type of that type, and you find out it's going to somebody's, it's their hospital, or it's their something in some representative or mostly senator's district, that it's going to a special project in their area. And that's part of a dark budget that's in the general fund that most even legislators don't know. And we pass it every year. Pretty much we just pass it. And we might put up a little bit of fuss, but we never do much about it. But I think this year we're going to do something about it. And so I want the people back home that are listening, and the people that are going to watch this, to know that there's a lot of things out there. And finally, the rank and file members who used to just rely on the leadership and maybe even the Appropriations Committee to find these things out. We're done. We're at wit's end. We can't do it anymore. The budget isn't matching up, and it's getting too expensive. And so rank and file members have stepped up to say, we want more answers. We want to find out what's going on here. We're going to ferret these things out ourselves. And we're finding these things, and we're telling the people back home about them, and they need to know that. And they need to help us to continue to put the pressure on to reduce that spending that you were complaining about. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick. That's one of the things that really incites a lot of anger in me as well. Whenever you read through there, and the specifications in the fiscal code are such that they are going to one absolute organization. It may not say the hospital XYZ, but that's who's getting the money. And they're buying votes through the fiscal code. They're buying votes using these special earmarks, and we say that WHAM doesn't exist anymore. That's not true. Representative Pyle.
Thanks, Matt. I believe the reference you were looking for was county of the fourth class, city of the third class. There is only one city of the third class. They're getting quite a bit of money for their hospitals. Okay, I object to that. And what he just brought up, man, before I get going and on a roll here, let me make it clear, you are preaching to the choir. We want to know why we can't roll the spend number back from 3199 to 3146, where we did balance. We were told we can't do that because it's already been made into law. Okay, believe me, that was our first shot. Now, what Rick brings up about appropriations sadly is correct. I've been on that committee for 6 years. There are stuff that comes out of the final product I never saw. Okay, and to close, Matt, I'm really impressed that you're going to be able to do tablets for all your kids. And when we all hold the line on taxes, that's a comprehensive thing. Thanks. That's it.
Representative Warner.
Thank you, Matthew. I just have a quick comment. Nancy, thank you so much for your testimony today. You had talked about the increase in government spending. Just to kind of throw out, just people could wrap their hands around it. Since 1970, we have increased our total operating budget by 85%, and that is adjusted for inflation. So from 1970 today, for some reason, it costs government 85 times more money to operate. I don't understand it. So I thank you for testifying today. One quick reference I want to make about it's been brought forth a couple times today about the fireworks tax, just so that everybody knows that the fireworks tax is on new fireworks, so it would be on expanded fireworks, not on what currently exists. It would be on the bigger fireworks.
Currently not even legal.
They currently aren't legal here, yes. So I just want to reference that, just so
Well,
agree, disagree. I just want people to know that it's
As
on
far as
expanded
the
fireworks.
electricity use in our schools, our budget this year was very difficult to pass. And there's no room at all for any increases in anything. Our special education costs continue to go up because of the opioid problems we have. Students are experiencing more problems with education, and we, by law, have to accommodate those students. So that money just keeps getting spent. There's nothing we can do about it. So we really cannot afford this.
Thank you, Nancy. I would suggest, Nancy, maybe after the meeting, if you haven't had a chance to talk to Representative Reese, he's done great work in trying to push forward fair funding formulas and real reform that would help your public school districts. I'm really disappointed that it doesn't seem like it's going the direction it needs to right now, but I commend Mike, and I think you two would be good to have a conversation about that. With that, I do want to again thank those who took the time to testify in today's informal hearing. You know, Governor Wolf has wanted to raise taxes. He wants to raise taxes for the 5th time in 9 years, and I know that the people that I represent here in the 51st District simply cannot afford to continue to allow this to happen. Real reform, as we've talked today, needs to happen, and it needs to happen in Harrisburg. We're talking about zombie taxes and shadow budgets. Government transparency needs to be a true focus. We're talking about a $32 billion budget, but as Nancy just alluded to the fact, it's more really like an $80 billion budget. And we need to be transparent about how we're really spending that money. I feel like today's hearing is a step in the right direction, a chance to obtain feedback from stakeholders within the Commonwealth, and an attempt at transparency in this budget process.